Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I listened there to Senator O'Neill's contribution, and I just can't believe that these guys over there are such a shadow of their former selves. Such a shadow. I am reading right now a biography by David Day of Paul Keating. And Paul Keating, regardless of the disagreements we may have had with him on this side, he was a man of courage. He was somebody who wasn't afraid of the big ideas and the big challenges facing the nation. He was part of a government that wasn't afraid of making changes that sometimes were unpopular, sometimes weren't accepted. He wasn't afraid of even putting a consumption tax on the agenda, and that wasn't accepted at the time. He failed in that endeavour. But we have a Labor Party now who will never have the experience of failing in policy because they just don't have the guts of putting anything up in terms of policy to deal with the issues facing this nation. They are now resorting to attacking the guy who came up with their university policy in the late 1980s. Bruce Chapman was the man behind the ideas of HECS. HECS was a system put in place by the Hawke-Keating governments. It was a good system. It was a system that has stood the test of time. It was a system in response to the unsustainable policies put in place by the Whitlam government. Those policies of free education could not continue. They could not continue in an environment where we want upwards of 40% of Australians to go to tertiary education. We cannot have a free education system for 40% of our young people. We cannot afford it. And the Labor Party knows that we can't afford it too, because that's not anything they did when they were in government. Indeed, they walked away from it 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And when they did, they had a guy called Bruce Chapman advising them on how to move away from it. And they introduced a system called HECS, which gave people an income contingent, non-means tested loan to cover their education expenses. It made sure that there were no barriers in this country. If you are young, intelligent and want to get ahead, you can go to university with no upfront costs. It's a good system. It's a good system. Now, the government at the moment funds around 60% of a student's course costs. Depends on different degrees, depends on different qualifications, but on average, the Commonwealth Government stumps up 60% of a student's costs at university. HECS, the loan aspect, or it's called HELP now, HELP covers 40% of those expenses. The proposal that the government has put forward is that we move that to, rather than 40-60, to about 50-50. We do that because, of course, we have a big problem with our budget right now and we need to have some savings. We also do it because we want to actually invest in higher education. We want to make sure that people can invest in higher education, that universities aren't treated like some kind of New York flat where you can't charge more than a certain amount of rent. And what happens in markets when you fix a price and not let them charge any more? You don't get investment in those markets. You don't get higher quality in those markets. And I want to see a high-quality university sector. I want to see Australian universities become some of the best in the world, and the way we do that is to encourage investment in those universities. And the government's proposal will do that. It will do that because it allows universities to set their fees commensurate with the services they provide, commensurate with the quality of those services they provide. And they can afford then to perhaps attract the best talent to Australia, to teach people in physics and chemistry and high advanced engineering. They can afford to keep the best people in Australia in those disciplines rather than see them go overseas to universities overseas who aren't as restricted as here in this country and can pay them more money. I'm all for keeping that talent in this country. I'm all for making sure that our universities become stronger. And also, I'm all for fighting for a fairer system that reflects the fact that the benefits of going to university accrue to those who are actually at university. And I myself personally went to university from a high school where not many people went to uni. I went to school in Logan, just south of Brisbane, and only around 15% of my Year 12 went to uni. And at the time, I thought it's very unfair that I was doing an arts economics degree funded by the good people, my good friends, who had gone and got a trade or an apprentice or some other line of work paying tax, so I could do a philosophy degree and think long and hard every day about whether this table exists. That was very interesting. It was a very interesting exercise, but it wasn't particularly beneficial to the wider society, and I was being subsidised for it. So we need to make sure that we have the confidence to go forward with policies that improve our universities, and these do, Mr Deputy.